Okay,
sure.
So I think it's on the hour. So we've got a nice amount of people here. That's great. So hi, I'm Ed Ivemy-Cook. I'm the chair of the conference committee. And welcome to the SORTI 2022 conference. Just a couple of housekeeping things before we begin and have a fantastic plenary talk by Corina. But note that the session is recorded and it will later be shared on the OSF platform. And the link that you'll find, hopefully Don will post the link if you can to the OSF meeting page. So there is a code of conduct, and this is available at the sorti.org webpage. So it'd be good if everyone can familiarize themselves with that. Also, if anyone wants more detailed information, particularly on any of the events that are happening over the next couple of days, there's a conference information pack. There's also there's also the Shiny app, but then there's also lots of the Zoom links that you can find in the dedicated Google Doc. And then please note that also discussions are happening in Slack. So if you're interested, you can always head on over to the Slack. There's a plenary Slack page for Corina's talk to ask any questions. But obviously, it's best if you put questions in the chat here. We're really excited for the plenary, for this plenary and other plenaries at the conference. And we're also very much looking forward to the interactive events where you can participate in shaping a more open, reliable and transparent future for ecology and evolution. And we hope that you'll find one or more of these events to attend. So just very quickly, you can turn off or leave on the automatic captioning by clicking the live transcription button. And if people have any questions, you can ask it in the Q&A function of Zoom. And then I'll select some of the questions and answers from below. So if people could upvote any questions that they want answered. So Corina will give a fantastic talk, and then we'll have 15 minutes of Q&A. And then we'll head over to a regular breakout Zoom meeting, and then we can have a more informal discussion. And that link is also available in the conference information pack. And if you do have any questions and there isn't enough time to answer them, there's obviously that Slack channel. But without further ado, Corina Logan is going to be giving a talk today about how peer community in registered reports how peer community in registered reports lets researchers take back control of the publishing process. And Corina Logan investigates how behavioral flexibility relates to invasion success in grackles, and whether training species to be more flexible increases their chance of success in human-modified environments. As a senior researcher at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology in Leipzig, Germany, she co-founded Peer Community in Registered Reports, which is innovating registered reports to make them accessible for all fields and types of research, and co-leads the Bullied into Bad Science campaign, where early career researchers are working to change academic culture to adopt open research practices to improve research rigor. And I'm very much looking forward to this talk. So I will hide my video and share your screen, Corina.
Thank you so much, Ed, for the great intro. I'm going to share my screen now and just double checking that you can see it. Ed, do you have a?
Yes, I can see it. Yeah.
Great. Great. So thanks for having me. Thanks for inviting me. And I'm really excited to be here and to discuss some cool new stuff with all of you. So I am going to share a talk that I gave last year that I designed for this purpose to share with a lot of people. And I gave it at Reproducible Research Oxford, and I had them record it so that I could share it with everyone. And so I'm going to play that for you, and then we'll all engage with each other, with me and each other after the 20, I think it's about a 28-minute talk. So I'm going to start this, and here we go. The intro, and thanks for everyone for having me and joining me here today. It's always fun to chat about all these kinds of things. It's always a work in progress. So yeah, today I wanted to talk about how peer community and registry reports lets researchers take back control of the publishing process. And you might be asking, well, aren't we already in control of the publishing process? And I argue that academia, as we are currently structured and currently work, that's actually not the case. So I'll take you through a life cycle in first the exploitative route of an article and then the ethical route of an article. So here's me inside of academia, and I just got an article accepted at a journal that is subscription based. So institutions pay annual fees for subscribing to be able to read these journals. And so I think, yay, I just published this article for free. And what I don't realize is that on my behalf, academia paid about $5,000 US for this article to be published. And that those profits, of which there are many because it costs almost nothing to host a PDF online, go to shareholders at these primarily 4 main publishers where almost all of our research articles are located. So for example, Elsevier is one of these publishers. They make about 50% profits, which is more than Google. And they're draining money from academia because they're publicly traded, which means they're on the stock market, and those profits are going to their shareholders. And that they're doing a great job of meeting their goal, which is to maximize profits, but it's in direct competition with academia's goal, which is to share research. So it's published behind a paywall, this article is, which means that it's available to read by the scholarly rich. If your institution has a subscription to this journal, you can read the research. If not, you can't. And what I think we don't often realize is that many researchers are at institutions who cannot afford any journal subscriptions or only a few journal subscriptions because they're so expensive. So we're discriminating against other researchers when we publish behind paywalls, as well as patients can't read the research, medical doctors can't read the research, and the public can't read the research. And it's the public who funds this research, so it's a broken life cycle loop. It's not a loop at all. There are a lot of ethical problems here. And so I want to set the ethical framework for conducting and evaluating research. And I think it's based on 3 pillars. And these pillars are that researchers and publishers have a responsibility to the public to provide them with free access to publicly funded products, which are a common good. And the second pillar is that publishers of research products have a responsibility to researchers to value the generation and packaging of knowledge. And the third pillar is that researchers have a responsibility to the public to conduct rigorous research because it serves as a foundation for the advancement of discoveries, it provides the best value for the money, and it earns public trust. Now, I argue that the ability to conduct and evaluate research depends on whether one can read, understand, and verify research, and whether anyone can generate and disseminate research in the system that we work in, regardless of their wealth, access to opportunity, perception of prestige, and evaluated implicit biases. So clearly we need to change how scholarly publishing works to be able to implement this ethical framework. And so I tried, right? So I was at Cambridge at the time that I got really interested in this, and I tried to change how scholarly publishing works there by a number of means. And University of Cambridge is 800 years old and has layer upon layer of bureaucracy. So, and everyone passes the buck and no one takes responsibility for anything, and no one will say yes, it's just a bunch of closed doors. So I was not successful there, which spurred the implementation of bullied into bad science, which the aim there was to put pressure on institutions from the top down. And so a few of us at Cambridge started Bullied into Bad Science, which is a campaign for and by early career researchers. So we often feel pressured into taking actions against our ethics to pursue an academic career. And so we wanted to lead individuals and institutions in adopting open practices to improve research rigor. And we do that by having early career researchers sign a petition where we're asking senior researchers and institutions to take 8 actions to incentivize open practices and allow us to improve our research rigor while also benefiting from being selected for in job and grant processes. So when I was doing this, I was learning all kinds of ways that people are bullied into bad science, because when people sign the petition, they can write anecdotes about how they're being told to make up data to get into a particular journal, and just all kinds of rampant scientific malpractice. That happens every day. So one question we got a lot was how, okay, we know how we don't want to do it, right? But how do we want to do it? What should I do? What should I tell people to do? And so we embarked on a venture for how do we do research ethically in academia. So here's the ethical route of an article. Here's me in the middle. I got an article accepted at a journal that's 100% open access. So it's free for people to read. And I choose how much money academia spends on my behalf to make this article published in this journal. Actually, most open access journals are free to publish in. Something like 70% are free to publish in. So if I want to pay money, I can, but that's my choice. It depends on the journal and how much they charge. But I choose where I put it. Now, the part about where the ethical publishers come in, it has to be a journal, a 100% open access journal at a publisher where the profits can contribute back into academia. So nonprofit publishers meet this criteria. Also, PeerJ for me meets this criteria. They are a for-profit corporation, but they give a lot back to academia, and they're trying to change how scholarly publishing works. Also, my lifetime membership there costs about $200 US, and I can publish in an unlimited number of articles there for this, and I never have to pay again. So it turns out it ends up being almost free the more articles I publish there. So these are the kinds of considerations to think about when you're looking at the publisher who's publishing the journal you're interested in. Now, the article is available to read by the public because it's open access, and articles that are open access have been shown to result in more readers, shocking, more citations, more media attention, and the authors benefit from more job opportunities and funding opportunities. Now, it's available to read by the public, by everyone, and the public funds the research. So this is kind of a closed life cycle. The money stays in academia. So there are more pieces to think about in the ethical route, and I ended up making recently a decision tree that goes with this article. So I just talked about open access journals. There are a couple of other things to think about as well. For instance, the article license is CC BY 4.0. This is the license that makes the research the most open and reusable, and it keeps it so that you are cited whenever someone uses your research. So they have to credit you in this copyright license. When you sign your copyright over to a publisher, you lose all rights to this, and people can't text or data mine or anything. So, and you can't even use your own figures a lot of times. So this is one consideration to think about. Another is whether the peer review history will be published alongside the article. So I was a reviewer in a confidential peer review process at a very well-respected journal in my field. And the reviewers did not think that this was an article that actually was even honest in a lot of places. It was published without really any changes, and it is considered a peer-reviewed piece of literature when in fact it wasn't. And after I had this experience, I decided I'm never going to do confidential peer review again. I want people to be able to judge the quality of the peer reviewers, the quality of the editor, and the quality of the authors and how well they responded to the concerns that were brought up. And then that also makes the process of the quality control of the science open, so that you can evaluate and do a meta-analysis when you have more and more open review histories at a variety of places. So then there are two pieces here that is the APC too high? So there are barriers to people to publish in journals, and one of them is cost, and one of them is whether the journal selects articles based on subjective impact or scientific validity, whether the scientific validity is whether the article is scientifically valid. If yes, accept. If not, reject. But subjective impact is dependent on the handling editor's opinion. Is this an important study? And it's been shown that this is a racist and sexist policy, as is charging fees to be part of academia. And so I encourage you to read How to Be an Anti-Racist, and So You Want to Talk About Race, as books to understand what racist and sexist policies are and what we can do in academia to become anti-racist, anti-sexist. And there's so much we can do. It's actually really exciting that we're at this time and we can change so much. So I'm going to, in a minute, tell you about a publishing process that solves all of these ethical problems. But first I want to talk about, how are these policies racist, sexist, that are built into the academia that we know. So selecting based on subjective impact and charging authors and readers money are racist and sexist policies. And the deal here is that the incentive structure is at odds with research rigor. So to get jobs and grants, researchers are often told to publish in high impact factor journals that select articles based on their subjective impact rather than scientific validity. And these journals are selecting articles that tell sexy stories. So this leads researchers to manipulate the story and the stats. So harking, hypothesizing after the results are known, and p-hacking, doing as many analyses as you can until you get a significant p-value, and then pretending like you originally thought that p-value was going to happen in that particular direction in the first place. And so people are doing this manipulation to make a sexy story to get it into these particular high impact factor journals, but it's been shown that this actually selects for bad science. So when we use and promote metrics like this, for instance, using the number of first author articles in high impact factor journals, when you're selecting successful grant applicants, or your next job hire, or your next students who get into your program, these metrics are making it that only the people with privilege get into the power positions in academia. And that's because people with more privilege are more likely to have access to opportunities that allow them to score higher on these metrics. And who's scoring higher on these metrics? Well, people who publish more in the more well-known journals are white, and people who score higher on the metrics are particularly men, who are perceived to have higher quality research than women. And it's been shown that men have more first author articles in high impact factor journals. And so the academia is selecting for it in these prestigious positions in academia. It's been shown that most faculty and most editors are white men from overprivileged countries, and that means like the US and the UK. So people who are inside academia here, they can afford to pay to read and publish, and success is defined based on their experiences. And so that's why these racist and sexist policies continue. But there's so much we can do about this to take anti-racist and anti-sexist action. So I'll show you this difference here first about the equality versus equity argument. So we have on the left image here, it's assumed that everyone will benefit from the same supports. They are being treated equally. So you can see this person who's shorter and has the same size box to stand on as the other people can't see over the fence to watch the baseball game. In the second image, individuals are given different supports to make it possible for them to have equal access to the game. They're being treated equitably. So now the shorter person has two boxes to stand on, and they can see over the fence to watch the baseball game. In the third image, all three can see the game without any supports or accommodations because the cause of the inequity was addressed. The systemic barrier has been removed. So the opaque fence is now gone, and everyone can stand however tall they are and watch the game. So what we need to do is remove the barriers from academia that are created by money and perceived impact. And we can do this by selecting articles based on scientific validity, not subjective impact. For high impact venues, you can use double-blind peer review to address the prestige bias. And assess individual research quality. So this means focusing on the background of the person under consideration. Don't be colorblind, because that is a form of racism. So what privileges, when you think about this person's background and how they grew up, what they experienced, what privileges did and didn't they have access to, and what did they do with the privileges and opportunities they did have access to? And you can sign and implement the San Francisco Declaration on Research Assessment. And this is saying that I will not select people based on metrics. I will select them based on individual quality. and then make it free to participate in academia. So on that quick overview, I want to jump now into the ethical model that can address all the problems that we've encountered in the exploitative route of publishing. And that is peer community in. So it's a journal style peer review where there's an editor and at least 2 reviewers of a preprint that's hosted at a preprint server. So if it's accepted, then PCI publishes the peer review history on their website, and the authors update the article at the preprint server, and that's the peer review version. Now, PCI is not a journal, so you can then submit this peer review preprint to a journal and ask to have an additional peer review waived. PCI is a researcher-run nonprofit organization, and they publish their economic model online. So you can see how much money they make from where. It's all donations, and where they spend the money as well. But the cool part is, so it's free for readers, it's free for authors. It costs almost nothing to run. So for each PCI, so there's a PCI, you can make a PCI in an area that you don't see one. So there's a PCI in evolutionary biology, a PCI in ecology, paleontology, etc. And if you want to have a PCI in your area, you can make one. But each PCI costs about 500 euros per year, and that's just for the website hosting and development. And then if you want to go and include travel expenses for promoting your PCI, you can. I don't, because I just do it as part of my everyday life. So it's really cheap to do the peer review of articles. So PCI already existed, and there was something missing, and that was registered reports. And so one of the great things about PCI is that if you have an innovation and you want to implement it, you can. And so I and some co-founders founded PCI in registered reports. So first, let me walk through what a registered report is for those who don't know. So you have a study plan, and you get that pre-study peer review before you conduct your study. And if it passes the peer review there, then you get an in-principle acceptance. So you're basically guaranteed to have the post-study write-up accepted, given that you follow your plan. So then you get your in-principle acceptance, you conduct your study, you write the preprints, and then you submit it again for post-study peer review. And they just check to make sure that you followed your plan and that you're not overstating your results and conclusions, and then you have the final preprint. Now, registered reports as an article type began in 2013. Chris Chambers implemented it at the journal Cortex, and he's one of the co-founders of PCIRR, which is pretty exciting for me. And the point here is to address a paradox. So which part of a research study do you believe should be beyond your control as a scientist? So like, is that the intro, the methods, the results, or the discussion? The correct answer is results. But then which part of a research study do you believe is most important for advancing your career? And fortunately, that's also the results. And what's best for research in this case, which is not to touch the results, is in competition then with what's best for researchers in terms of producing lots of great results. And so the register report format can really address this because there are a number of other questionable research practices that come up when we put researchers under pressure to get great results. So it can result in lack of replication, low statistical power, selective reporting in multiple places, publication bias, lack of data sharing, and changing the hypothesis after you have your results. So the solution is to make results a dead currency in the evaluation of research quality, which results register reports does. So peer community and register reports, we started it because we didn't have there was nothing out there that had everything we wanted, that we wanted to innovate for register reports. So we made peer community and register reports, and we went nuts on innovations, and we're still doing innovations. I mean, I'm just really excited about this because it's opening up the world of register reports to more fields, qualitative research, you know, people, it's not just for science, it's for everyone. So 6 innovations that we made were offering programmatic register reports. So stage one register report, the pre-study write-up, can lead to many stage 2 manuscripts. So you might have one theory that you're using to test a variety of different experiments. And so instead of writing one registered report for each of these experiments, you just write one registered report, and then you can have multiple articles resulting from this one. So that saves time. Another time saver is you can schedule the review process. So if you submit a one-page snapshot, at least 6 weeks before when you want to submit your full stage 1 report, we'll schedule the reviewers in advance, and so they can turn around the peer review time faster. We actually train our editors, which we call recommenders. They have to pass a test to be able to handle the registered reports at PCIRR. To my knowledge, no journal offers this. So we thought it was really important, and people are responding really well to it and appreciating the education. So the peer review is undertaken independently of a journal. And the cool part here is that if you can leave your peer-reviewed pre-registration, your peer-reviewed preprint at the preprint server, it's peer-reviewed, or you can submit it to a journal if you want to. And at PCIRR, we have about 20 what we call PCIRR friendly journals, where they will automatically accept your anything accepted by PCIRR. So if you want it to go into one of these 20 journals, you can. But here, instead of shopping your registered report around to all these different journals, and some of them don't even offer registered reports, then you just get the peer review happening in one place. It saves a lot of reviewer time. And then you choose the journal you want to put it in, if you want to put it in a journal. The authors can choose whether the reviewers must sign the reviews or whether it's optional. Some journals require that all, like F1000 Research requires that all reviewers have to sign. And so if you know in advance that you want to target a particular journal, you can align the PCIRR review process with your target. And we explicitly state and address the level of bias in the registered report with the taxonomy of bias control, which I'll tell you about a bit more in a minute. So how it works is that you put your registered report at a repository. You submit the URL to your registered report at the PCIRR website. It undergoes peer review, you revise and resubmit, and eventually it likely gets recommended, which is accepted. Then you conduct your study. You put your preprint at a preprint server, so your final write-up. You submit that URL to PCIRR. It undergoes peer review, revisions, and then it's recommended. And the cool part about PCI is where the editor writes recommendation text about why, like how this process went for this article and what is the interesting thing about this article. It's actually really cool. It's like a letter of recommendation for each article. I found it actually useful. So it's recommended. You update your article at the preprint server, and it links to your peer review history and recommendation, which is citable, and you can then submit it to a journal if you like. We select based on scientific validity and not subjective impact. So here's the level of bias taxonomy that I wanted to show you, and I'll show you this through the recommender test, the editor test we have our editors go through. This is one of the questions on the test, and so let us just walk through this. So suppose that PCIRR receives a stage 1 manuscript proposing a study in which the data that will be used to answer the question have been accessed and partially observed by the authors. The authors also certify that they have not yet sufficiently observed the key variables within the data set to be able to answer the question. Is this submission likely to be eligible for consideration? Yes, provided additional steps are taken to control risk of bias, or no, the risk of bias in this scenario is too high for PCIRR. Well, the correct answer is yes, we can handle that because we have this these levels of bias, and you just have to declare what your level of bias is. So level 6 is where the data do not exist at all before you get pre-study acceptance. So you haven't conducted the study, you have no data to look at all. And then if you're down here at level 1, you've got data collected, you've seen the results. Like, think about it in terms of like a long-term study, right? You've got a long-term database, data are coming in year after year after year, and you've seen like the large columns of maybe 10,000 rows of data. And if the data is there, but maybe you have a new hypothesis you want to ask of this data set. You can do that as long as you haven't done the analysis you're proposing to do yet. So you, as long as you haven't done that, then you can have a registered report and just declare your bias level to be 1. So if at any point, like let's say I submit my registered report at level 6, I haven't collected any data yet, but I have this like non-negotiable start date for data collection. My birds, their breeding season stops and I've got to start collecting data now. Then I just notify the editor at PCIRR or what level I'm dropping down to, my submission is dropping down to. And so this can be really useful for a variety of making registered reports more flexible for people. Okay, so changing to an inclusive model for academia. Well, we need to make things free to read and publish. We need to implement anti-racist, anti-sexist policies, and we need to actively recruit based on potential, not prestige. And we're doing that at PCIRR through recruiting articles based on registered reports, so they're potential, not prestige, because there are no results associated with the registered reports when we accept them. It's free to read and publish at PCI, and at PCIRR, I've been implementing, so I assigned myself the role of being in charge of recruiting the editors and the managing board. And what I've been doing is testing out ideas for how I can implement anti-racist, anti-sexist policies. So some of the things we've been doing are inviting people from groups who are traditionally underrepresented in academia first, finding what I call invisible people. So I've discovered that people in a lot of countries who are faculty at universities, the universities don't necessarily have a tradition of putting their faculty on the university website. And a lot of these faculty don't have Google Scholar profiles and don't list themselves in databases. And so how do you find these people? You know, it takes me a lot of time to find just 10 people to invite, but it's been so worth it and just eye-opening in terms of differences in how academia works in different countries. I invite people in batches, so only when a batch has diversity do I then send out the invitations. And we emphasize that we'll train and help people with English when requested. So I've worked in Spanish and in German, which are not my native languages, and I know how hard it is to do that. And so the idea that we would discriminate against people because they aren't native English speakers is another way that biases can really creep in. And so my goal right now is to strive for a majority minority, which is kind of a ridiculous thing to say because what we're talking about, the minority in academia, are actually the majority of people in the world. It's just academia that has this selection funnel. So these are some of the things we're doing at PCIRR, and I'd love to open things up for discussion right now and yeah, see what you think. Okay, that was the talk. So now we can open it up for the live discussion. But first I'll just put a little shout out to we're recruiting recommenders at PCIRR. So if you're interested in becoming a recommender, send us an email at our website. We do balance for diversity. And so if we're not meeting the diversity goals for a particular batch, a lot of people go on the wait list. And so people get off the wait list when there's balance with our recommenders at PCIRR. So if you're on a wait list, don't worry, it's nothing personal. I'm just trying to make the balance work. So pop us an email if you want to become a recommender. And if you look at my Twitter or the PCIRR Twitter account, you can see what we go for people who are recommenders. Like they should be independent researchers who already have a PhD and a few first author articles. All right, Ed, shall we do Q&As?
Yeah, sure. So if anyone has any questions, just put them in the Q&A box. That would be great. I kind of had one. I wondered, I guess I love the initiative. I think it's great. Going back to that, elaborate flow chart that you had of all the different sort of things where you get your report, for instance. Well, actually, it's two questions. How long do you think that would take to get, say, a review done? Is it comparable to, say, well, are you aiming to get it done quicker than, I guess, traditional journals? And secondly, what journal are there journals that you can name that recognize the registered report? If that doesn't sound naive.
Yeah, so not naive at all. I'll start with the first one, which is, sorry, I can only hold like one thing in my mind at a time. So can we go back to your first one?
Yeah.
Oh, you just
muted myself.
Okay, there we go.
The first question I have, just roughly, what time frame were you aiming for say this whole process to take? Oh yeah, going back to that flowchart would be great.
Yeah, there's actually a more specific one that Chris made.
Oh, nice.
So this is the scheduled review track that Chris innovated at PCIRR. So this was one way that we decided to try and speed up the peer review process. At this point, the scheduled review track is fast, but so is the regular track. So at this point, there's they're both really fast. And if I was to give numbers, I don't know if we've taken an average recently, but I think getting in principle I mean, it depends on how long it takes the authors to revise, but we're getting our first decisions out within, I think, like about a month or two is kind of the standard right now, which is fast relative to a lot of journals.
Oh God, yeah.
Yeah. And so the scheduled review track, I mean, the thing about the scheduled review track is, you're just submitting one page to PCIRR, and you're saying, here's my title, here's the hypothesis that I'm testing, and just some very broad points. And then based on that, we accept or work with the authors to make it acceptable, and then line up reviewers for it. So then we say to the reviewers, all right, in 6 weeks, the submission is going to come in. If the authors miss their deadline, then the scheduled review gets canceled and they have to submit in the regular track. But the authors usually submit on time. And then the reviewers know that they have this 5-day window to turn around the article, and they're prepared for that. So in this case, the peer review happens in 5 days because the authors have lined up that date. It's just that, if I get a review request right now, I'm like, my week is full, my month is full, but maybe I can plan in 6 weeks. Hey, I know I'm going to be able to do this review then, and I'll schedule time for it. So I think people are kind of reviewers are appreciating that part of the process. So I think that answers your first question, but the second one was what?
So the second one was, what are there currently? Can you name some journals which actually,
Yeah. We have now 27 PCIRR friendly journals, and we chose and collaborate with some that are very broad, like PeerJ and Royal Society Open Science, so that people from a lot of fields have a journal that they could use. And so they automatically accept anything that we've accepted. There are also what we call PCIRR interested journals. And these journals are ones where they'll consider a PCIRR submission, an accepted registered report by us, and they'll make a decision within like a few days about whether they would want to require further peer review or not. And then the authors can decide whether they'd be willing to go through another peer review or not. So there are kind of these two levels, but more and more journals are jumping on the PCIRR friendly track. And now our authors are like, oh, I want this journal, I want this journal. So now authors are recruiting PCIRR friendly journals, which all the materials for that kind of recruitment are at our website. So we make it pretty easy for people to jump on board.
That's amazing. I didn't realize it was so many. That's awesome. we've got a couple of questions in the Q&A. So Bhavan asked, I was very intrigued by the concept of peer review waiver. I did not know it was possible. Can you say more about this? And then he asked, how common is it, and are many journals allowing this, and how long would the process take? So maybe answer the first part. So can you say more about the peer review waiver?
Oh, right. So I'm an author. I have my registered report. It was pre and post study peer reviewed at PCIRR and accepted and passed peer review. And now I'm saying I want to submit to a journal and get it published there. So if it's not a PCIRR friendly journal, where they will automatically waive their peer review. And so that's an automatic agreement. We don't have any process, sorry, I'm reading as I'm talking, any problem there. And then there are the PCIRR interested journals, and then there are the journals who have never heard of PCIRR, but you can still approach them and ask. That's how we got all of the PCIRR friendly and interested journals on board in the first place. A lot of them, they're pretty amenable to it because we publish the peer review history on our website and on the PCIRR website, so they can see everything. If they need to know the reviewer names, sometimes our reviewers choose not to be named, then we have they can that I agree to be in the event that a journal inquires about my identity. Looks like, am I back?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
It was either me freezing or you. So I think you were at the stage where you're saying a journal was about if reviewers wanted to name remain anonymous.
Right. So then the reviewer can choose to have their identity revealed to the journal if the authors are requesting to put their article there, but only to the journal editors and not to the public. So reviewers get to choose that piece. I guess in terms of how many journals are allowing this, in PCI, across all the PCIs, there are quite a few journals that do allow it. So there is a list at the PCIRR website about, the PCI, and superiorcommunityN.org is the main website for all the PCIs. And they have a long list of journals that PCI articles have ended up in. And so it's PCIRR that has the specific agreement with certain journals that allows the automatic acceptance. And so there's a little bit of a difference there. So yeah, I think journals have been pretty interested. Certainly in terms of my articles that I had at PCI Ecology, where we did this like pre-registration pilot that before PCIRR was born. I think that journals, I submitted 4 to journals, and three of them the journals wanted, and 1 they didn't. So I put it in a different journal, and is based on like impact kind of decisions. So it seems like depending on maybe your connections with the journals, it's easier or harder. But I think that there's a lot of interest there.
Okay,
cool.
That's great. So Mathieu Paquet had a question. Do you know more or less the percentage of submissions that once accepted get submitted to a traditional journal versus just stay in PCI, or get published in the new PC journal?
Yeah, so so Thomas and Denis are the PCI founders, as well as Benoit. So I'm leaving out last names, but they're like, if you email contact@peercommunityN.org, these are the guys who respond. So I am not sure of the numbers on how many people with PCI recommended preprints submit their preprints to journals. I think it's a high percentage. And then in terms of whether they get into these journals and or whether the journals want to add a new review process, I'm not totally sure on those numbers either. And I'm not sure that PCI are quite sure about the numbers either, because it's an independent process that the authors would need to we need to do like a lot of follow-up like questionnaires and things. And so it's not necessarily data we have on hand, but we do know that authors are submitting to journals, and we do know that journals are accepting them without further peer review. And sometimes authors run into problems, but we don't really know the numbers there, at least to my knowledge.
That's very cool. I mean, everything you were saying about the fact that some journals just say, okay, it's been reviewed in PCI, and then it's just, yeah, I think that's very, very cool.
Well, the thing is like, who's reviewing these and editing these articles at the journals? We are.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So it saves them tons of time and energy because we're doing it for ourselves, and then the authors get to choose what they do with the article.
And I guess as well, it would be, if these experts have reviewed this paper, it goes to a journal, and they may end up just sending it out back to the same experts who reviewed it in the first place, right? So it just kind of, yeah, no, that makes sense. Does anyone have any more questions and answers? Oh, well, questions, not answers.
There can be lots of answers, I'm sure. We're still figuring it out as we go.
I do have another one. What's the sort of long-term goal for PCI in terms of what do you think, like the ultimate goal for it in terms of every journal, or at least the vast majority takes on board the PCI register reports, that kind of thing?
So for me, the point of PCI in general and PCIRR is to, we've got these peer-reviewed pieces of research. We don't need journals. They go away. Publishers go away. We stop exploiting ourselves and throwing public money away, and just do things, keep it all inside the system. That's my goal. I know it's the goal of a lot of other people at PCI as well. We realize that people need a transition period, which is why we're connecting with a lot of journals and making that process easy for them. But, as an author who's undergone this process a lot, I have to format it for the journals. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this thing is already peer reviewed and out there. It's taking me a whole day to just get this font to work in a Word document. This is ridiculous. I'm wasting my time. So I would have no problem throwing away that part of the process.
Oh yeah, that's fair enough. Oh, Dom's got a question. So can you tell us about the feedback you've received from people who have used PCIRR? I'm sure it's been quite positive, but are there also challenges? That's a great question. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a PCIRR author, Gilad Feldman, and he has submitted 20 articles. He's our highest submitting author. He's incorporated PCIRR into the undergraduate process at his university, which is really cool. And I'm just going to the question again because I have the memory of, I don't have a good memory. He did a talk on PCIRR, and before he gave the talk, he requested feedback from people who've used PCIRR, and the feedback was amazing. It looks like people are really feeling like if you do a register report, the recommender, which is the editor, and the reviewers are kind of on your side. They're rooting for you. They're trying to help you make your research better. And because it's a registered report, you haven't done the study yet. You can change anything at that point, So it's a really high likelihood that you can get it accepted. And so it feels more like a collaborative process rather than gatekeeping or just trying to shoot people down. And so it tends to be a kind of a friendly process too, like people are giving useful comments rather than negative feedback. And so there have been overall very positive responses that he found. Also, we have had a couple of pieces of feedback that from someone who was upset about having their registered report rejected, and so we're trying to get more details about that. But so far, it was just a Twitter conversation, so not quite clear about what's going on for this author. But aside from that, it's all been really positive.
That's great to hear. And how many did you say? 20 already?
This person? Yeah.
Yeah.
In total, we have had, I think Chris recently said 90 submissions so far.
That's great. That's great.
And we're about a year old, so it's been very prolific.
Dave Angelini has a question. He's going to turn on his video to ask it.
Come on in.
Hi, guys. So I was supposed to be one of the original hosts, and for technical reasons wasn't able to start us all off. But I have a question, and since I don't have access to the actual question panel, I thought I'd video it in. So Corina, you talked a little bit early on in your talk about the sort of misalignment of incentives from institutions, and I'm really wondering the other side of this, sort of getting value or acknowledgement of the value of this process from institutions. And it sounds like you've had some experience with that, and I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that and how can we all try to make that change locally for us?
So are you thinking in terms of PCI specifically, or are you thinking just in general?
In general, sort of more, less value to metrics and more value towards the kind of rigorous and open approaches to science.
Yeah. So it's becoming more and more common for job descriptions to put in the required qualifications that the candidate must have a commitment to open research practices in any particular way that they discuss that. So when you put it in the selection criteria, then you're selecting for these particular pieces. And if in a job description, you have to rank the candidates according to these particular pieces a lot of times, and 1 point for this and 1 point for that qualification that they meet. So this can be a really useful way of incorporating it into an institutional level for how we can grow these open research practices. Well, I call them open research practices. They're ethical, this more ethical pathway. So I think that it really does rely a lot on institutions adopting policies like this. And we all as individuals can influence these policies at our organizations. So a lot of people have been posting a lot about diversity and inclusion initiatives, which are great for this because it's breaking down these kinds of barriers. And once you start to open up to these kinds of to people who haven't had access to as much privilege, then you really start to think about, where do I recruit? It changes everything about as a lab group leader, how you run the group. So changing policies at that level as well. So the group level, the university level. And it's really just made up, all of this is just made up of us individuals. And so, if every person who told me, well, I don't want to change first, I want to have these things, and if things were different, I would change. If everyone who said that to me did actually change, then everything would have changed already. So it really is just a matter of us changing our behaviors and making these different choices. It's all about the choices that researchers make, because the libraries are, university libraries are subscribing to these journals like crazy because we're asking for it. But their hands are tied because that's what we want, and the researchers outrank the librarians, and the librarians are really frustrated because they're the ones who know where all the money goes and how it works. And so we need to take responsibility for our choices. And so I think it really starts from the ground up, and we can affect change at all of these different levels as individuals, as we gain more and more privilege within the system.
Actually, can I ask a follow-up to that? I'm
Sure.
I'm really curious. I know there's a history of sort of registered reports in medicine, if I understand that. Has there been either support or conflict from other disciplines at all in this process?
Yeah, so psychology was then the next field that took on registered reports, and so that's been going on for several. Well, Chris Chambers is a psychologist, and he's the one who started the registered report article type at Cortex in 2013. So it really started, and then he started it all his other journals, and so it's really been ramping up in psychology, and other fields are getting interested. So for instance, right now, economics is pushing hard for registered reports. They just got, I think, a list of maybe like 15 journals, economics journals, to agree to offer the article type of registered reports. I don't really know like what sparks a particular field at a particular time. A lot of people in ecology are starting to think about this now. Comparative cognition is really getting into the registered reports as well. I think it's kind of like once a field does an analysis of the replicability of their analyses of their results, and they find out, ooh, our research is not actually very replicable or reliable, let's start doing registered reports. But every field that does this analysis of their replicability ends up finding that it's not nearly as replicable as they thought. So maybe that's what triggers it. And I don't know if economics did this, but there's a huge push there for them. But yeah, so far, I think the field that has been the least interested is chemistry. It's been really, I send out a lot of invitations to recommenders in chemistry, and no one's responded. So yeah, it does seem to be kind of field specific, and I don't really know what it is that sparks that interest, but slowly the different fields are jumping on board. And then one of the points of PCIRR was to make registered reports more flexible, to be able to adapt to these other fields. Like quantitative research was previously the only way you could get a registered report, but now we offer registered reports for qualitative research. And so that was one of the ideas behind PCIRR. Let's make registered reports available for everyone and feasible for everyone.
That's a great answer. Thanks, Corina.
Sure.
Oh, Noel Schenk wrote, I wonder how you would answer to someone saying that registered reports in ecology are less easy than in other fields, because in ecology, the analytical choices can change more easily. I personally heard it frequently in discussion and haven't found a good answer.
Yeah, I've heard that a lot too. And it happens to me a lot. So I'm a field biologist, everything that can go wrong does go wrong. And so I have these registered reports, and I had these big plans, and then I have to go through and be like, oh, well, that didn't work. And then that didn't work. Oh, and I learned this about this analysis, and so I actually should be doing it this way. So we made it more flexible at PCIRR. So that what you can do is you can, in registered reports in general, what you can do is if you need to make a change, you can suggest that change to the editor or recommender who handled your manuscript and that you got in principle acceptance from, and get that included as part of your in principle acceptance. So they might need to send it out to the peer reviewer, 1 or 2 peer reviewers, or maybe they can just check it themselves and see if that change still makes it scientifically valid. So you can go through and incrementally update your IPA as you go. So that is one way to, that's one way to be able to have some flexibility there, and you're not completely tied to this thing that ended up not working out. I'd say that's the probably the more straightforward answer. Some of the other innovations we've made at PCIRR make it more easy for people, you know, where you don't, like I said in the talk, my research, I'm not totally sure when the start date is because it depends on the birds. And so we made that more flexible. So the idea here is that these innovations are making research register reports available to more fields so that we can address these kinds of flexibility issues.
Great. Well, that's actually perfect timing because it's pretty much top of the hour. I know Tim's got one more question, but I think it probably makes sense if he holds it and we can go over to the post-plenary mixer, have a little bit more of an informal Q&A. So I'm going to end this now, and then I'll see everyone over there and with Corina as well, obviously. So thank you very much. See you